Hey everyone, welcome back to Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Holmes of SVCSportsZone.com and SVC Sports Talk, joined here with my brother Matt as we are ready to start up season 2. So this 31st overall show will be our first show here in season 2. And Matt, we look back, it's hard to believe the 30 shows that you and I had an opportunity to do what started out maybe as a little bit of a hobby during some quarantine there, just started to grow and grow. The feedback was tremendous. And we've covered a variety of topics that really, as I said there in the opening, covers a lot of coaching, a lot of leadership topics. Good feedback from teachers and coaches and business people and people in all sorts of walks of leadership. So, I don't want to waste too much time, but I certainly want to give you an opportunity to say hello and kind of look back on what excited you the most about season 1, and maybe what excites you the most about looking ahead here to season 2.
Well, I think, like you said, 30 episodes. When we started it, I don't know that we knew how many episodes we were going to try to fit into that first season, or how long a break we were going to take before season 2 and all that. But it's good to be back now with some new episodes on the horizon here. I know tonight we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what these past few months have held in high school sports, and kind of getting through all the COVID stuff and being able to complete fall, winter, and spring sports, an entire year of high school sports. But I know beyond tonight, we've got some interesting topics, I think, coming up as well. And the one thing about it, when you're in the world of sports, there's always something new happening, and there's always something that catches your eye, and you think, oh wow, we could talk about that, or we could, that could be tied into high school athletics as well. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of stuff to talk about over the next few weeks, and looking forward to season 2.
Well, again, we appreciate everybody watching on YouTube. You can check us out, SVC Sports Zone Shayne, or if you're listening out there, wherever you get your podcast app, certainly appreciate the support. And, Matt, we always like to try to have a title to kind of guide our show. And in this particular season opener here in season 2, as you look back on season 1, we certainly don't want to drive COVID in the ground any more than maybe we had to at times in season 1. But we did think it was a great opportunity in terms of leadership to ask ourselves who thrived during this adversity. Because, again, that's exactly what it is. COVID-19 was an adversity, and some people said adversity on steroids. It was an adversity that many of us had, or really all of us had never really seen before. So it got us looking back on it. And I guess I looked at it from a self-evaluation, a self-reflection, in terms of how I started to evaluate it, yet reflect on it. I got thinking today about how I try to go about a lesson as a teacher or as a practice as a coach. You've been coaching basketball for 20 plus years now as a head coach. How many varsity practices, just to give the listeners an idea, do you think you have during the course of a year?
Yeah, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70, 65, 70, depending on, maybe do you win a tournament game or whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of a good round number to base it on.
Well, I don't know. Every coach is different, I'm guessing. And, you're in a situation where I know you have a little bit of a drive from where you coach and where you live. But, I think a lot of times people, after they're finished, they have some reflection time. And again, I don't know if it's the same every night for you or what, but I'm guessing throughout that many practices, you've had some really, really good ones. You've had some really, really bad ones. You've had some things where you're like, hey, I love that drill. I really need to use that more. Or man, that particular segment of the practice schedule was a mess. Or hey, how much time and effort did I really put into that practice plan today? Did I have to throw it together? Was I on time? Did we have resources set up? All those different things. I'm guessing that happens with you just like it does any leader. So when I look back and I think about evaluating the things that took place, I don't know if that's fair or unfair when you think of results. I know we're in a results-driven business, but again, this was a unique time. But there's certainly an aspect of reflection that I think if people fail to utilize here, they're really failing a great opportunity to grow as a leader. Because when you look back and reflect at some of these things, again, it's unprecedented. It was a situation that we were making decisions and we were going through things that we never had before. Just what's your take on a combination of evaluating and reflecting back on, the overall situation and how you're going to go about this evening evaluating who thrived during COVID-19?
Well, it's interesting, Shane. I actually went back and kind of listened to episode 1 that we did back in April 2020. And, our first episode, we felt like, we had to at least talk about COVID once, to start the show, just because at that time it was when everything was sort of hitting us so hard. Schools were being canceled, sports were being suspended at all levels, right? Professional, high school. And we had talked on that show a little bit about giving our thoughts in terms of, at that time, what our leaders were doing and the decisions they were making. And I think, looking back at it, like you just said, you do have to look at the results a little bit, because that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, it is a result-driven thing. Whenever you're a leader, there's going to be failures and successes and whatnot. And then you have to balance that with the process of why did I make that decision, with the information I had at the time, was it the right decision? And as I look back on this whole COVID situation, starting in the spring of 2020, I think my personal opinion is we probably did fail in the cancellation of spring sports. And the reason I say that is, looking back, we really could have played that season. When you consider that just a month later, we had Little League seasons going on, we had summer baseball stuff going on, and then we turn around and we figure out a way to play football and volleyball, cross country. We figure out a way to play basketball and have wrestling, right? Even though you can make the argument that the COVID pandemic was at its worst in late fall, early winter, we pressed forward and we found a way to play those sports. And if you remember the arguments against having spring sports, what were they? It was, well, the main one was health, right? This is too big of health risks. What was the other? Well, we have to be in school. If we're not in school, how can we have sport? Well, now if you fast forward, I should say, a few months, we played sports even though we still knew it was a health risk. And we played sports even though we weren't in school. Not all of us, not everybody was in school 5 days a week, or some at all, or whatever, right? They were doing online. So those arguments of why we canceled spring sports, they now look kind of lame. And when you consider that we went ahead and played the sports just a few months later and found a way to do it. Now, that's the result part of it, right? It's pretty easy to look back now and say, we probably made the wrong decision. But when you balance that with, like what you said, the process of what information did we have at the time? What were we, let's face it, some panic was setting in. We didn't know what we were facing. But I think, too, when you make decisions based on that, based on fear, based on public pressure, the right decisions don't always get made. But so when you look back and you self-evaluate, I think, to be fair, you have to look at how did it work out? And if I were in that situation again, what decision would I make? And unfortunately, the same decision might have got made again because of the situation we were in at the time, right? Maybe lack of knowledge, maybe fear. Our government was making a lot of the decisions that took it out of the school's hands to begin with. There was a lot of moving parts there. So, to answer your question, I know it's kind of a long answer, but to answer your question, it's when you look back and you self-evaluate, you do have to look at the results, obviously, but then you also have to look at, I made that decision with the knowledge that I had at the time. So, how do you balance that? I don't know. I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I think you have to try to meet in the middle somewhere.
It really is interesting because, the results, again, are so cut and dry. Usually a win, either win or you lose, or you're as a teacher or as a school, you pass the test or you don't. The business person either makes their sales goal or they don't. All those things are pretty much the results driven. But again, I think what happens is too many leaders do lose an opportunity to have that reflection piece, and that's where a lot of the learning takes place. Now, after a while, again, you have to have that result. You take the 76ers. That's an organization that's made the process term so famous. It was all great when they were in the early process, right? And they were improving or doing whatever. After a while, it's time to, advance and show the ability to win a championship. And like this particular year obviously didn't happen. And now people are starting to, point fingers. So it's a fascinating thing. And Matt, when I looked at my notes tonight, I kind of went back to my language arts roots in terms of some brainstorming and putting words down. And I started to find a theme of a lot of words that start with C. And I kind of came up with my 5 C's that I'm going to lead my outline part of the show tonight. Feel free to jump in and change and do whatever you need to do or comment or whatever. But, my first word in my 5 C's of how I describe who thrived during this adversity in COVID-19 is compliance. And with compliance, I got to thinking, many people who have listened to the show here locally know that I'm in the process of stepping out of the classroom after 22 years, and I'm going to take a principal position there, an assistant principal spot there at Paint Valley Middle School. I'll be the assistant for middle school, high school, but really kind of the day-to-day operations of the middle school. And at the end of last year, I had a chance to step in for 2 weeks there and kind of play the role of administrator. And boy, when you take off the 22 years of perspective of teacher, and even just in 2 weeks, you start to put on the glasses and the perspective of administration, you start to really not worry about, but you start to truly hope that you can understand and learn the rules of the game, so to speak, right? You want to be in compliance. You know that the accountability and responsibility is to make sure that you're doing things the right way. And, Matt, it got me thinking back to one of our favorite shows from year one. Remember when we talked about the cheating, the Astros went through that and all that. And, maybe you could even say now with the way they check the pitcher's glove and hat and all that stuff when they're coming out of games. But it got me thinking about, knowing the rules, knowing the guidelines, knowing, the integrity part of it, the mental influence and so forth. And to me, this really hit me hard in terms of thinking back to COVID. The people who have been able to follow the rules, stretch the rules a little bit when needed, but having knowledge of what they're able to do. Think of the protocols. This is hit hard in terms of, Chris Paul missed Western Conference Final game. John Rahm was winning the Memorial, by 6 shots after Saturday, and basically had to be removed from the tournament. It's the knowledge and guidelines of compliance to me really strong here, because I think in all levels of leadership, you always look for an advantage. You're always looking for a competitive advantage. And like we joked on that show last year, what is cheating? What's just stretching the rule? But in all seriousness, don't you feel like compliance and knowledge and understanding of guidelines was a real big factor in describing people who were successful during handling things, especially when you're responsible for the health of others during COVID-19?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that's true. I think that obviously we were put to a situation as coaches and athletic administrators, players, where there were a lot of hoops we had to jump through, right? There was a lot of rules that had to be followed. And I think, and I was actually, Shayne, it's funny when we just sort of look at the notes and we don't do a lot of pre-show discussions so that whatever we discuss on here is sort of spontaneous. But I looked at this a little differently, even from the standpoint of, you remember one of the shows we did in season 1 was of rules. Remember we did a show about rules, right? And the importance of, when you make rules as a leader, the importance of consistency and why do you have those rules. And I think we ran into a little bit of an issue during this crisis of we had so many guidelines that had to be followed that it was almost impossible to be completely compliant. in this. I mean, if you think about, you know, I laughed about it with like football. Okay, I mean, you got these guys. They go out there, they're tackling each other. There's a fumble. 7 guys pile up. Right. I mean, it's linemen are right up in each other's face on every single play for 4 quarters, and then we come off the field and we're getting yelled at to space out 6 feet and put your mask on under your helmet. Okay, and it's like, well, okay, wait a minute here. We're out on the field, or I laughed. Somebody said in wrestling, after the match, you weren't allowed to shake hands. I mean, you just wrestled for, you know. I mean, there was a lot of that kind of thing going on where it left you scratching your head. And I think what happened, my observation, when trying to get players, for instance, to be compliant was, daggone, there's so many things we have to try to remember and do. Like with my basketball players, one of the things we really tried to push for was when you're in the locker room getting dressed, have the masks on. You're in close quarters. Let's have our masks on. Let's get dressed, because we're in a tight space or whatever. We tried to push for that because that was very practical. But then where we ran into issues was, players became frustrated when they felt like they were trying to be compliant, do the right thing, but then there was always one more rule, right? There was always one more thing. Our girls at Benton County made it to the state Final Four, okay? Had a phenomenal season, dream season, right? I mean, it's never been before in our school history had we accomplished that. And at the state tournament, you remember there were COVID observers, right, that came in from the OHSAA just randomly. I'm sure you had some of that at Paint Valley from time to time or whatever. They would just show up. And the thing we got dinged on was girls high-fiving and hugging each other after they won. After they won the state semifinal, yeah, they high-fived and hugged. Are you kidding me? You know what I'm saying? And it was like, so it's okay to go out there and guard somebody tight, spit flying and breathing on each other, but let's not high five or hug. My point is, I think we got to a point during that, we're talking about leadership, right? Where our leaders put in a lot of rules that, if we're being honest, looking back, were for show. It was an opportunity to show how hard we were trying to show, hey, listen, we are really making an effort to be compliant. But at the end of the day, some of those rules were a bit silly, in my opinion. When you have too many rules, I guess here's my point, Shayne. You said to be successful, the people that really obeyed the rules had success. I agree with that, but I think if we really want 100% compliance, we need rules that can be followed. We can't put so many things in place that almost makes it impossible. Does that make sense? So I think it goes back to, as leaders, we need to be careful when we're putting those guidelines in place.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you just said. I think where I was coming from is, again, no matter what you agree or disagree with, a lot of times when you're in charge of something, there's going to be a body that's above you on the ladder that is giving you rules of the game. And I guess where I'm coming from, if you're a principal, it's coming from the state, or if you're, the ODE, if you're a coach, as you were just describing, it's coming from the OHSAA, which again may be coming from the government down. But my point is, when you think of teams that were lost time to quarantine, when players lost time to quarantine, the ability to go through compliance didn't protect you 100%. But again, it at least puts you in the best percentages. And I guess this leads really well into my second point, which the guys that have played for me a long time in baseball will almost finish the sentence, or the phrase, I should say, for me. And they'll hear me always say compose and compete. And I guess it kind of leads into what we just talked about in terms of people that are successful during adversity are the ones that have no excuses. Everybody was going through this. Everybody was going through the uncertainty, what are the rules? How do I follow them? What do I need to do next? And I think the no excuse policy really hits home here. When I think I'll hear there's so many injuries in the NBA this postseason, and you always hear every single coach as the leader get up there in front of the microphone. What do they always say? Next man up. I mean, you know, well, coach, I hate to tell you, when it's Kawhi Leonard, there may not be a next man up, or Trae Young, it may not be a next man up. You know what I mean? But again, to the Hawks' credit, they won games. To the Clippers' credit, they won games. You know what I mean? Without those particular people, I mean, Giannis Antetokounmpo didn't even play in the final two or three games of the Eastern Conference Final, and here they are in the NBA Finals. So my point is, we see it in sports all the time, and I was just doing a professional development the other day where I was quoting the great Pat Summitt, where she was talking about how, hey, we can't be afraid of results. You know what I mean? Like, and we were talking about it in education, like as teachers, you can think whatever you want about state tests. You can have whatever opinion you want. At the end of the day, we can't be afraid of them. You know what I mean? We can't be afraid of the results. We need to understand we're either getting this score or we're not. Same way in coaching. I'm all about process. I love all season workouts. I love different things, but at the end of the day, are you winning or are you losing, and why? Okay. How can you get better? And I guess that compose and compete, we talk about it all the time in baseball. Umpire maybe made a bad call. You're pitcher, you feel like you're getting squeezed. Well, it doesn't do you any good to have bad body language. It doesn't do you any good to run your mouth. Compose and compete. You see what I'm saying? Right. As a hitter, don't stand there in the batter's box and show up the umpire. Get yourself back to the dugout and get ready to go play defense or cheer for your teammate. It's compose and compete. Go on to that next thing. So, I'm not disagreeing with your take on compliance, but don't you think at some point, as leaders, no matter what it is you're running, I mean, I'm sure restaurants went through it. I'm sure businesses went through it. It had to be a hard time to make the dollar amounts all add up. But don't you think at some point you had to be all in, and you couldn't have excuses?
No, I do agree, and I think that my point on compliance was more of from a leadership standpoint. I think we have to do, maybe a better job of putting guidelines in place. But to answer your question, yeah, most definitely. Once those rules are in place, whether you agree with them or disagree, just like with this COVID stuff, we would have players, and I think every school went through this, where you had players sort of disagree at some point. Why are we doing this? Why do we have to do this? It's silly. But as a coach and as an athletic administrator, we had to continue to preach the stay the course. Listen, you're getting to play. Those spring athletes in 2020, they didn't get to play. You're getting to play. Let's find a way to make it work. Yeah, are some of these rules a bit over the top? Yeah, probably. But at the end of the day, let's just do what we have to do to be able to play. And I think, and the excuses thing's an interesting comment too, because I don't know about you, but because I know you get around a lot to different gymnasiums, and not only as you're coaching, but you're also for the website and for SVC Sports Talk. I mean, covering games. I'm sure you talk to a lot of coaches. I don't know about you, but it was like, for me, it was interesting to hear certain coaches talk about, it seemed like certain coaches you talk to or certain ADs you talk to was like, oh man, this is crazy. This is a pain. This has been the worst year of my career. This has been, and some coaches you talk to were just like, hey, we're just happy to be playing. We're looking forward to the opportunity. And I think it's all what lens you've sort of looked through that as to, what success you probably had at the end of the day.
I don't think there's any question. And, it's funny, as I move down my notes here, I don't even know if this next one's fair, and it kind of goes off what you're talking about there a little bit in terms of how people handled it or made decisions. I thought of consistency, and I almost ended up taking it off my list because I thought, man, I don't even know if that's a fair one to evaluate during the COVID-19, because things were certain anything but normal. But as a lot of people like to say, can you get comfortable being uncomfortable?
Right.
I think the great leaders, Matt, find a way to make normalcy out of abnormal situations, if that makes sense. I mean, I think it's one of those things, routine and procedure. I don't know if it's in your program, but in our baseball program at Payne Valley, we use PACT, pride, attitude, class, talent. And those are some of the things that we talk about, and we really try to live in the way we conduct ourselves each and every day. but then from a baseball standpoint, we have what we call absolutes or everydays, and it's pretty much just, it doesn't matter if we're going long, short, hard, light. Those are things we pretty much do every day, to the point where if there's once or twice during a year where you do take it out of like the kids will almost look at you like, hey, we don't have to start with the base running, or we don't have to do this or this. I mean, it's just what we do. And I think the consistency, I noticed it in the classroom, even when we went from flex schedules to regular schedules, and we were online and we were doing all different things. Consistency brought back the smallest amount of normalcy, and normalcy seemed to put kids at a comfort level. Leaders have a way of getting in front. I think there's too many people in leadership today that, they get up in front of the group, and it's one thing to be honest, but it's another thing not to know. I mean, it's well, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what our plan is. I don't know where we go from here. Well, you need to, I mean, it's one of those things where I think there's a calm, that compose and compete that I talked about, that brings a consistency. Did you sense that at all? And in terms of leading your group through a year like last year, that maybe was a little bit different than other years, where you found it difficult to be consistent in your approach?
Yeah, I mean, like I just mentioned, the attitude of stay the course, right? I mean, it's that just, yeah, it was hard to be consistent, because let's face it, it seemed like there were new hurdles, challenges every day. I mean, we were fortunate never to ourselves be quarantined, okay, during basketball season last year, but we did face situations where we would go 12, 13 days and not play because of maybe two of our opponents back to back had been quarantined. So now all of a sudden that consistency becomes difficult. Can you practice the same way every day when you go 2 weeks and not play a game, right? Is your performance the same when you do finally get a chance to play the game? There are some battles with that consistency during adversity, but I think routine maybe is the right word. You try to stay in as much of a routine as you can based on the situation. And obviously that was a challenge I think for everybody during this, from principals and superintendents on down to coaches. It was a challenge. But I think let's be real honest, probably nobody was able to just be perfect at that. But the people that were at the best at it probably were the most successful.
Matt, and the consistency, it brings me to my fourth, and this has been one I've had starred in my notes. I've looked forward all day to getting back in the studio with you here and kind of asking you this particular question and talking to you. And the word is chemistry. Some people might say, well, some coaches get lucky with this. Some teams have great chemistry, some teams don't. Okay, and maybe that's fair. Maybe you have a group that comes up through school together and they've been great friends, and far before you had them in class or in basketball, baseball, whatever it is you might have them in. But I don't think it's by accident when great leaders, especially ones that have been in their particular jobs for a while, just happen to have really, really good chemistry with their people and with their groups over and over and over and over. And I think when it comes time for adversity, man, chemistry is what wins out. If I had to star one of my words here in terms of who wins during COVID, I think it's people that have rock solid relationships. It's people that have a chemistry about them that where, hey, I care about the person to my left. I care about the person to my right. We're going to do this together. We're going to figure this out and get through it. And I guess when I start throwing out words like teamwork and trust and investment and care and relationships, I would ask you this question, because you've been doing what you do, Matt, for a long, long time, and you've been crazy successful. And I just wonder your take on this. Can talent handle or win during adversity? And if so, to what extent? In other words, how far can talent take you before there has to be a deeper thing than, hey, this kid can really dribble, and this kid can really hit, and this kid can really throw the football and run a route and do all those. At some point, there has to be more than that, in my opinion. I just wanted to see if you agree.
Yeah, I've always felt that way. I don't even know if that is only during adversity. I think it is as a whole, but I think everything's magnified, like you talked about at the beginning of the show, during a crisis.
When you
And
lose, even it doesn't have to be
well, yeah,
COVID-19, just a losing streak.
well, yeah. I mean, that in itself is a crisis, right? In terms of sports, I mean, it is. I mean, when things aren't going well or whatever. And I've always said, especially at the younger levels, that chemistry is crucial because I don't think the maturity level of high school kids is such that you can just sort of overlook it. I think every now and then at the professional level, you may get away with it because guys, in fact, are professionals and they're just like, okay, let's go about our business. But I think at the high school level, especially, there has to be some real like there amongst each other, some friendships. I'm not saying every single person has to be best friends, but I think there has to be a certain level of that, you know, especially, I mean, in every sport, really, even the quote unquote individual sports, I do think there has to be some level of team chemistry. And I think the best coaches or the best leaders are ones that foster that and sort of cultivate that a little bit.
Well, I don't think there's any question. I just, I've always felt like, you'll hear a lot of people in sports or in job places or things like, hey, you don't have to like each other, but you have to work together. You don't have to like each other, but you have to play together. And I guess at the end of the day, that's true. But man, I just don't see how that works. I mean, it's people oftentimes will ask me what's kept you at Paint Valley for 22 years, and if I'm answering that question honestly, it's the people I work with.
Right.
It's one of those things where we've been through plenty of adversity, but it's a situation where our relationships and our chemistry make it really strong. So, Matt, that brings me to my fifth and final one, and I guess that this is probably one that takes all of the things we've talked about and combines them because I think they all play a role. But my last word was creativity. Um, I just wonder what you thought of this in terms of whenever you're going through something that you've never been through before. I think there has to be a sense of problem solving. I think there has to be a sense of reacting on the fly. You may not always have time to research your answer. You may not always have time to sit and think about your answer. But it's that creativity in terms of maneuvering around. I know a lot of coaches use virtual stuff. I know a lot of coaches did Zoom meetings with each other, Google Meets, all those different things. That creativity. In terms of the way we had our staff meetings and so forth, is a huge factor to me. I don't know if you have a particular example that sticks out to you in terms of a coach or a teacher or anything, but don't you think when you think back and you're like, hey, that person was successful, right? That person actually did a pretty good job during this tough time. Don't you think there's probably a piece of creativity that would come to mind when you think about that?
Well, yeah, definitely. And I think you saw that during this pandemic because I think once we uh, got through last summer and as we moved toward fall sports, we found a way at that point to make things work, right? And to do that, there had to be some level of what you're saying, some creativity of, okay, how are we going to handle spectators? How are we going to handle safety precautions in the locker room and on the buses and on the sidelines? And whereas in the spring, we just sort of threw up our hands and said, well, we just have to cancel. And again, some of that came from, you know, our state officials that didn't allow high schools really to do those things. Okay. But I think as a whole, as a society, we just sort of said, what do we do? We can't do anything. And then once we had some time to catch our breath and get our feet underneath us, we found ways to get it done. And it's that old thing of where there's a will, there's a way, right? And I think that was proven over this last school year because to be able to get an entire year of athletics in under these circumstances, there had to be some creativity. How much creativity did we show in the classroom? We just, I mean, okay, well, we've got to make sure kids have ways of doing assignments electronically, and some kids are going to work from home, and but we found a way to educate. We found a way to allow kids to participate in sports, and that's quality leadership when you use that creativity to find a way to get it done. So even though I'm a little disappointed that we weren't able to get that done sooner in the spring of last year, we eventually got to a point where we found ways to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned in the introduction that it would be neat to look back and think about, okay, where were we right? Where were we wrong? What do we learn from it? That reflection piece that I was talking about. And, I'll kind of just start and we can go back and forth, or you can, again, if there's something else in your notes, feel free to jump in wherever. I'm just kind of walking you down my personal outline. I think one thing that jumps out at me, not just on that first show that we talked about, but really on multiple shows throughout the year, and then on SVC Sports Talk, John Bruce and I, where we went over 300 shows this past year, something we were really proud of there on our podcast there for SVC Sports Zone. The fact that I believe that we were right in terms of how we think the COVID-19 and that time period is going to forever change the way media covers high school sports, and how OHSA had a huge decision to make at the time and how they could get these games out there. Well, now, as we try to transition back to normal, as well as I do, people want a piece of that pie, right? That there's money to be made in different things. And are they going to let the live sports go out, and how are they going to have the rights to them and different things? And I know here in our Ross County area, we've got some people that are really aggressive, and they're looking to broadcast a lot of sporting events and different things. So even though I still don't know all the details, and even though I still don't know exactly how the OHSA is going to rule on all these things, or the compliance or the rules that they're going to put out there, but I do think it's safe to say that, man, this time period is going to be something we look back on as a time that forever changed the way media was covered. And I was just curious your take on that, Matt, because I know down in your area, there's some neat things through Ohio University and some of their people that cover your area. Am I correct there? Right. Through football and through, and they do a super job on some of their video work and some different things. And then, like I said, here in Ross County, we have some people continuing to do some of those things. What's your take on all of a sudden, the games being right out there live for people to watch, and coaches probably freaking out about, games being on YouTube and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting last year with everything being live streamed. It's funny it took a pandemic like this to be able to give people, in some ways, more access than they've ever had before. There was less access from the standpoint you couldn't go to the gym and sit there and watch the game, right, whenever you felt like it. But there was this almost unlimited access to sit in your living room and watch the entire league play basketball one night.
All right, I would sit on my couch and basically scout like 4 opponents in one night.
Right. I mean, stuff that you had never done before. And now here we are, even though I think most of us expect this fall to have full crowds and full capacity, yet the OHSA has approved schools to be allowed to live stream still. And that surprised me a little bit, to be honest with you, because they've never, before this COVID thing hit, you were not allowed to live broadcast games. Everything had to be tape delayed, whatever. Then they did it because of the limited capacity at stadiums and such. But they're continuing to do it now. So that surprised me a little bit. And I think it's what you're saying is I think some of this stuff that we did during the COVID pandemic, you're going to see that we figured out, wait a minute, this is almost maybe better than it was before. Maybe we should continue this. We're seeing it in business, right? There's people working from home now that even though they could go back to work, business owners are figuring out, wait a minute, it's cheaper to let these people work from their house maybe than it is, So I think we figured out some ways to do things more efficiently due to this. And I think the same thing happened in schools. And like you said, the way media covers games and all that. So I think some of this stuff is here to stay for a while. And it just goes to show you, even in the worst of times, some things can be learned,
Well, there's no question about that. I know, I'll throw another one at you here. I wasn't sure what category to put it in because, again, someone who's been in spring sports for about 25 plus years now, there was a time where I felt like, we were right and wrong. We kind of felt like there at the beginning that spring sports would probably be just an easy out in terms of, like you said, it's not much of a financial hit. Yet there, as we return there in 2021, I know in our spring sports circle, we were a little concerned of it happening again. So we were a little bit right, wrong, back and forth, and we were very thankful to at least have that opportunity to return. From an athletic director standpoint, I know you touched on it in the introduction, but I know that there's such a dynamic from football to basketball, to the track, to the baseball, softball, and all the different things that went into it. But that was one, Matt, I didn't really know exactly what category to put into it. Spring sports seemed to be the one that I don't know, as you said in the introduction, I don't know that there was a lot of consistency in terms of how they viewed those particular sports.
Consistency from which from what standpoint?
Well, like you said, not being able to play and then later being able to play.
Okay.
But is it because they didn't have a choice? Because, hey, we just, like you said, just let football, basketball, wrestling, all these go. We don't have a choice but to go. Or do you think we were just so much further along in 2021? 2020 was such an unknown. It was at the beginning, like, hey, if we mess this up, there's no turning back. It just seemed for me to be really difficult to say if I was right or wrong because I don't know that I ever knew.
Yeah, I think that I really think that looking back on this thing, and maybe this, Shane, leads into my final thought, and you can kind of
Sure, go ahead.
run with it. But like, I look back at this and I think, okay, we made the decision to cancel. When I say we, I think honestly, I don't even know if the OHSAA had much of a choice in it, or the schools had much of a choice in it, because at that time the government had shut so much down. But like the decision.
Is it fair to say, Matt, that all decisions in this thing work top down? Very few decisions where we had I don't know if guts is the right word, but did we have the opportunity to work from the bottom up?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely fair. I think that the decision was made to cancel spring sports last year, and I think looking back, it was a decision based on, I think it was legitimately thought to be based on health and safety and all those things. But I think looking back, you have to question whether, that motivation was genuine. If 3 months later you're playing football in a situation where, because I guess what I'm saying is, if it was too unhealthy to play in the spring, it's probably too unhealthy to play in the fall. I think what we realized was, wait a minute, we can do this in somewhat of a healthy fashion. And let's be honest, I think too, we started to get to a point where, wait a minute, this thing might go on for a while. Or are we really just going to shut down everything for a year or a year and a half, And I just think, so I think that caused us to get into what you talked about, that creativity, finding ways to get it done, and it got done. So again, I look back, I don't know if, like I said at the beginning of the show, I don't know if we can say that the decision was absolutely wrong, because I think you have to look at the lens it was made through at the time. But I think hindsight being 2020, yeah, I guess the thing I hope we learn from all this, Shane, moving forward, if we're ever faced with a similar situation, is let's not just pull the plug on stuff and cancel stuff. What we've proven during this COVID thing, I mean, let's face it, this thing was a once. I mean, we had never seen this before, right? In the history of our world or whatever, or at least in 100 years or whatever. And what we learned, I hope, through it is, where there is a will, there's a way. You can still continue to have things. You just have to find ways to get it done. So I hope if something similar to this happens again, we don't just pull the plug and cancel, but we use what we've learned, all these things we talked about today, right? Creativity and consistency and composure. We use the things we've learned to be able the next time to continue stuff, not just to have to cancel stuff.
Yeah, I like where you went with your final thoughts there, because for people that maybe did not listen to us as much in season one, a lot of times for me, Matt, when I go final thought, it's that reflection piece. It's that reflection piece that I'm talking about, and it's a situation where when I think back on this professional development opportunity for me, it's a reminder that, hey, compliance is going to be a piece. As you go into leadership, you're always going to have rules and guidelines you have to follow, and there's going to be times where you have to be accountable, and there's going to be times you're not very happy with it. And as I tell the players, you got to compose and compete through it. And if you can find that consistency, and you can find the ability to have those relationships, and you can have that chemistry that I'm talking about, and you can sprinkle in some creativity, I just feel like those particular those 5 C's, so to speak, tonight give you an opportunity to be very, very successful during the time. So, on that note, Matt, we're about ready to wrap it up. I do want to let people know to get involved in the show. You can look us up, Facebook, Twitter. Again, if you follow SVC Sports Zone, it's going to be very easy to follow us on any of the social media, on the YouTube channel, SVC Sports Zone Shayne. And then anywhere you get your podcasts, we're out there, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, all the way down the line. And, Matt, on that note, I know we'll peek ahead quickly to the season here. We have some really neat topics. I know we're leaning here in our next show in terms of during the NBA Finals, during the All-Star break coming up, different things, kind of makes you look back at history, and that history kind of maybe leads into some records. And when you and I were talking about, records are made to be broken, and we're talking about, how that goes into leadership with expectations and where goals are set and so forth. I think that's a neat piece. There's several ideas that we're looking at. There might be partial revisits from last year, but I think a total different tweak. And then, with all these different sporting events going on and so forth, you never know when something's going to pop up to where it's something we have to talk about. So on that note, Matt, I'll give you the final word in terms of maybe something that excites you the most about season 2 when you look at some of these topics that you and I kind of brainstormed there as we were getting ready for season 2.
Yeah, I think the thing that's exciting to me, Shayne, as we really get into season 2, is we've had some time off. We've had some time to think about some topics that we want to do, and now that the world of sports is going full blast again, right? With at the professional level, things are somewhat back to normal. I think you're seeing things in the everyday world of sports that crop up that we say, oh, wait a minute here. That makes for an interesting topic. Because when we started doing this show, Shane, if you remember, everything was shut down and we had a lot of topics planned, but not a lot was going on in the everyday world of sports that caught our eye, right? That said, oh, we should talk about this or this. Now you're seeing more of that. I think even though we have some things planned, I think there's some topics out there that you and I probably haven't even thought of yet that are going to kind of sneak up on us. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to every week putting out a show for a while, hopefully, and just coming up with some different stuff here in season 2.
Well, guys, on that note, look forward to moving forward in this coaching and leadership podcast, and you'll hear me say on a lot of shows throughout the year, when it comes to these topics, we're never trying to just be right. We're trying to help get it right, and so on that note, we look forward to a great season 2, and we appreciate all the support. Thanks, everyone.